we are rolling. Hello everybody. I want to welcome everybody here today. If you can hear me out there, we're back in the corner. It's kind of like the only safe place they could really put me. So we're going to be doing some readings back here. Mark's got a commercial announcement.
We can actually turn it up just a hair.
Okay, we can do that. I'm a DJ. I can always go.
I know you can. You can always go. This one goes to 11.
You might regret sitting right there. Look, her hair is blowing. Really cool effects for science fiction. Once again, welcome everybody here today. You're going to be having various people back in this corner reading stories to you. And I get the honor and the pleasure of starting off with the first story. And my story is about Cahokia Mounds, or what I call Monk's Mound. I grew up going to Monk's Mound picnics, and we used to get to climb all over them, but you can't do that anymore. But it's a fun place to be. But my story talks about something that's buried 1 mile all the way down underneath the big mountain, which is Monk's Mound. Now, this is based, actually it's Christian-based science fiction, which simply means it's a clean indie read. It's a lot of fun to read, and there's a lot of good hardcore science involved as well. It's almost like a cross between 2001: A Space Odyssey and Raiders of the Lost Ark. Got to do this. Dun, 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 dun. You guys know that? Dun, 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 dun. Okay. All right. So what I'm going to read today is like 2/3 or 3/4 towards the end of the book, where there's been an accident on a new spacecraft that we just developed with private funds. SpaceX, I was 10 years ahead of them. And something happened, and we come to find out that that something that happened is directly related to Cahokia Mounds. There's a propulsion device on the spacecraft that's based on gravity. And come to find out, there's something based on gravity buried underneath Monk's Mound. So we have some government secret agent type people, as well as an archaeologist who have just discovered a secret, and they're going to go find out how to get to that secret. Irma saw, Daniel politely questioned as he eyed the elderly woman standing on the porch before him. As he closed his car door and took a step forward, he noticed the ancient but deadly looking sawed-off 16-gauge shotgun leaning against the door frame. 2 more doors closed behind him as his fellow companions exited the sedan. "You boys must be cops or something." Daniel smiled and then said, "Why's that?" He remained close to the car. He didn't want to alarm the old girl. "No one calls me Irma, at least no one except the law or politicians." She eyed the men with a slight suspicion, but it was clearly evident she wasn't in the least bit fearful of them. "So what should we call you?" "Miss Saul will do for now." She waited, patiently looking over the 3 men, and then said to Martin, "Aren't you one of them mound diggers?" "I'm Professor Martin Shervey, ma'am. I teach archaeology at the university." With that, Daniel Blackstone shot a subtle glance over to Martin, a definite hint to end the explanation. The look was not missed by Irma either. "So, what do you boys want?" "Miss Saul, Martin here tells us that your grandfather once had a mine somewhere around here." "Grandpa had a few mines," she said as she raised her eyebrows, waiting for the next question. "Ma'am, we're looking for the one called Devil's Hole." "Why?" "We're investigative writers, and we're doing a story on lost American folklore. We saw the story about the mystery of Devil's Hole and thought it'd be worth checking into." "Sounds good," she replied, "but I don't buy it for a minute." The men stood for a second, exchanging a quick, playful, laughing glance at each other. Martin realized just how good these government guys were at lying, and once again wondered, who are these guys? Before anyone else could say anything, Irma continued. She was plain now, leaned up against the door with both arms folded across her chest and asked, "Since when do investigators for newspapers wear guns?" Daniel was caught off guard by that one. "Ma'am, it ain't safe nowhere anymore," he offered with both hands raised at his side, palms up. "Oh, I believe that. Truth is, it ain't safe here neither." And in one lightning move, she grabbed her shotgun, pulled back the hammer, rested the butt of the weapon on her hip, and aimed it in the general direction of the three visitors. Daniel continued to hold his hands out to his side and said, "Miss Saul, I work with the Defense Department. We didn't mean to alarm you. Truth be told, we've been interested in this area for a long time. We need to find safe underground refuge areas in case of any accidents or attacks on our country." "Still don't buy it, sir." Daniel stood there for a moment, silently studying the face of the aged American before him. Finally, he looked over at Smitty, who simply shrugged his shoulders and looked back at Martin and then looked back at Irma. "We do work for the Defense Department, ma'am, but truth is, we just want to know if there's a way to go underground to Monk's Mound from here. We think something's hidden down there." "Really? Like what? Gold? Uranium? You trying to make more of those blasted H-bombs?" She had lowered her gun but hadn't set it aside. "You got a badge or something?" Daniel smiled as he pulled out his Defense Department ID. She looked at his ID and then Smitty offered up his to the woman to see. "Sure wish you government types would just tell the truth the first time round. Sure would save a lot of trouble." She opened the door and started to walk in. "Come on, I got some lemonade made up. Might as well share it with you boys. Besides, it's been a long time since I had a gentleman caller. Fact is, never had three at once. This could be fun." The three gentlemen callers all started laughing at once and then laughed even more once she set down the shotgun. The troop walked into the parlor that had large windows all around, giving it the appearance of a much larger room than it actually was. Grandpa liked lots of light. Hated working in the dark, she said from the kitchen as she poured lemonade over ice and blue carnival glasses. She was an elegant hostess, setting the glasses on a crystal tray and then walking carefully to the men who were all waiting in the parlor. "Please sit down, fellas," she said with a playful twinkle in her eyes. The room was full of antiques. In fact, the whole parlor was an antique. The afternoon sun was bouncing playfully all around the room from every imaginable angle, bouncing off one glass object and then another in a hauntingly magical symphony of light. It seemed the whole room was a prism of sorts. Irma saw the men looking at all the light beams and then began to speak again. "Grandpa used to say that God lives in the light and the devil lived in darkness. Said that's what the Bible always said." Daniel Blackstone checked his watch. He had about 30 minutes before he had to leave. And he said, "Miss Saul," as he began slowly, "I really don't mean to be rude, but I really need to know," he paused, "is there a way to get underground to the shaft or to..." He seemed to be stumped for the proper terminology. "The tunnel?" she finished for him. "Yes, the tunnel. What do you know about it?" "Been guarding this secret for better part of a century, and here you come one afternoon and want to know it all." She was shaking her head. It seemed to Martin that she was weighing her options, so he spoke up. "Miss Saul, I just met these two men down at the mounds. I began to tell them the legend of..." He didn't get any further, and she said, "Legend?" At first she seemed angry, but then she simply began to laugh. "The American dream. Get rich, own your own business, ain't got to answer to nobody. Let me tell you boys something. My grandpa loved this country. Loved this here neck of the woods, he did. Said it was special." She leaned forward as she began to majestically unfold her story, lowering her voice to practically a whisper, a very intense whisper. "He said this is the place where heaven and hell collide. Said he saw it himself. He found the tunnel after a big rain came through one day. Opened up a sinkhole, it did. Looked down into the hole and saw a bigger hole, a tunnel. He had a friend here in town, old William David. His whole family's gone now. For a moment, the men thought Irma would drift away on another memory, but she shot right back. Anyways, Grandpa, he ran down the tracks to David's farm, yelling, "I found a mine!" Old William was plowing in the field, so he finished up his work, and he left to go with Grandpa down into the tunnel. For a few moments, the walls, the large windows, the antiques, even the wrinkles on Irma's saw disappeared. The men were transfixed, memorized by the orator, and engulfed in the story of a day gone by, a lifetime away. They spent 5 or 6 hours just looking around, said they found enough coal to fill an entire train, so the next day they ran an ad in the paper saying they'd hire the first 20 men who showed up at the tracks by town on the following Monday. Now, long about Saturday night, Grandpa and William come running out of the tunnel, yelling and screaming like a whole nest of yeller jackets was fixing to chew them up. Irma paused just long enough to take a nice long drink, and then she continued. They came back into town and went down to the old dry goods store and got a keg of black powder. Then they went down to the tunnel and was going to blow it to smithereens. She stopped again and looked at Blackstone and said, "Now, that was the days you could trust a man with explosives. Fact, Grandpa used to take his shotgun to school with him so he could do some hunting on the way home." She laughed and answered the unspoken question, "Yeah, that shotgun. Sure is a different day now, ain't it?" Grandpa would cry his eyes out if he saw what was happening to the good old USA. She stopped again to collect her thoughts. Then, wiping away a single tear, she continued her story. So it was getting evening time, so the two men took the keg, punched out the seal to let the powder bleed out, and then rolled it down into the hole. Didn't know how far it went, so they lit the powder trail and ran as fast as they could. Next thing they knew, they were picking dirt and grass out of their hair and teeth, and the next thing they saw was a second hole going down in the tunnel. Grandpa said must have been something the good Lord wanted to leave open, so they just left good enough alone and went back to town and got all drunk up. Started telling people about how they saw the gates of hell and all that stuff. Folks all thought they were just drunk and crazy, so they never paid it much mind. Grandpa figured since he found one hole and then made another one, he was kind of responsible not to let anyone else go down there. So he hid the second hole and filled in the first. "Do you know where the second hole is?" Blackstone's voice ushered quietly through the rays of sunlight. "Well, I'll tell you. The first hole's right there," she pointed out to the flower garden just outside the window. "And you're sitting right smack dab on top of the second hole, Mr. Blackstone." Thank you. We have got just another minute or so of where they went down into the tunnel that led about a mile towards Monk's Mound. We're almost finished. This was a very intense story to write. It was fun to write because for the tunnel, I had to find a way in to go underneath Monk's Mound. And I went through the history books of Collinsville and found out that there was actually, all the mines in Collinsville are on the eastern side. But there was one mine that was on the western side, like around Caseyville. And the people who opened it shut it down just after a couple days with no excuse and moved somewhere else. Sometimes fact is stranger than fiction. It really is. So these government folks and archaeologists get some equipment together. The thing was, Daniel was sitting in a big rocking chair that when she did something with the alarm clock, the chair slid aside and there was a hole in the floor with a ladder going down into the tunnel. Right on top of this room filled with light. So how long we been down here? Blackstone asked as they rounded yet another bend in the tunnel. 20 minutes, Captain, came the reply from Smitty. Hey, Professor, what you know about these tunnels? No, this is all new to me. I thought this was just an old local fable, but he reached out his hand to touch a trickle of water as it meandered down the wall on his left. I never dreamed I'd be here. Blackstone was leading the small group slowly down the ebony slated corridor. He was in a hurry, but he knew at times being in a hurry could get you killed. We're still on course, it appears, he said as he checked the compass. The walls seemed to breathe around them, encompassing the small troop in the ancient underground lair of darkness. One moment the pathway was barely wide enough to walk through a single mile, and then the next, wide enough for the men to walk side by side. This is creepy, Smitty said. Yeah, I'm not liking it too much either, but hey, so far no one's been shooting at us at least. As they came around another bend single file, Blackstone stopped dead in his tracks. Martin winced as he heard the blasphemies emanating from the man. Then he simply said, Gentlemen, it seems we have a cave-in. Without saying another word, he held out his right hand, palm up, and waited as Smitty planted one of the grenades into his ready hand. Boys, I suggest you step back a few dozen yards. We're going to melt some rock. Martin had never heard of radiation pulse grenades before, but when it detonated, he saw a faint swoosh of green light that he knew he would never forget. The funny thing was, there was no sound of an explosion, no rocks flying through the air or crashing down, nothing save the faint, almost iridescent green flash. What about radiation? He found himself timidly asking. There's no residual radiation. It's all fused out of existence the instant it pulses. Let's go see if we made an impact. They got up from their crouching positions in unison and peeked around the bend. Wow, now that is cool, Smitty said as they looked at the newly open corridor, its rocks, walls now glistening in the artificial light like highly polished marble. Jules Verne would be so proud. As they started to continue on their quest, their attention was drawn to a light, cold breeze that came at them. That's weird, Smitty said. No, what's weird is that we're on our way 1 mile beneath the surface of the earth to look for a black hole, Martin replied. Yeah, I agree. This all does seem kind of like X-File-ish, doesn't it? As they walked, the ground began to abruptly descend beneath them to the point that it was hard to walk at a normal speed. Another bend and Daniel stopped dead in his tracks again, and this time he whistled. Wow, this is cool. The path was now a single rock, a yard wide, stretched out for about 30 yards with pools of water on either side. Daniel didn't make a move for a moment and turned to make sure the other two men were stationary. Then he turned out his light. The water was alive with a pale blue glow. Within it were swashes of orange and yellow as subterranean fish darted to and fro. The glow from the water was almost bright enough to light their way, but Blackstone turned his light back on, sighed, and said, I think we're getting close. The sub saw blue light just before it vanished. Sub was all Martin could spit out. Look, Professor, in some aspects of our little adventure, the less you know, the better for all of us. That statement didn't make Martin any more comfortable at all. So, if people died? Sighing, Blackstone answered. 2 fine men, soldiers. Worked with them both on more than one occasion. He stared at the scenery in silent reverence. It was just about this time that the reality of the situation was beginning to sink in even deeper to Martin Sherpy's soul. Thank you, thank you. God bless you guys. Yep, simple story, simple book of lies. Okay, fiction, all right. But it's a cool read, and if you're from Collinsville or Illinois area too, almost all the libraries have copies too. So I'm not in for the money, I'm just in for writing, you know? Yeah, so cool. God bless you guys. Thank you.
It's not a magical place. I love that.